If South Africa get out of their World Cup group, honestly, that would make people back home so happy. That is what gets people going. That is what resonates through the townships. And regardless of what background you come from in South Africa, what your social status is, or your class or your race, you love football. It's in your blood in the country. To win the 1996 AFCON World Cup after South Africa, the Springboks had won the 1995 Rugby World Cup was absolutely huge for the country. If the performances were disappointing, then yeah, that would be a stinker of a tournament. How people will judge the entirety, I think, of his spell in charge will come down to this.
Welcome everybody to Make Football Great Again, your definitive 48-nation roadmap to the 2026 World Cup. My name's Harry Brent, and over the coming weeks and months, we're going to be profiling every single nation heading to the tournament this summer to get more of a feel for the countries, the cultures, the fans, the teams, and hopefully we'll uncover a few little stories and secrets along the way too. As for today, we're covering South Africa, hosts of the 2010 World Cup, of course, and I'm delighted to say that we're joined by South African journalist, author, and former Sky Sports presenter, Melissa Reddy. Melissa, thank you so much for being here. Welcome to the show. How's it all going?
It's beautiful. It's been a lovely few years for South African football, which we haven't been able to say for a while. So it's positive heading into the World Cup. The African Cup of Nations didn't go as well as I think South Africans were hoping, but also neutrals that were covering the tournament expected South Africa to actually reach the final. That didn't go according to plan, but probably it's a good thing that they didn't reach the final because they may have won it and then been stripped of their title 2 months later.
Yes. So just before we officially get cracking, I just want to kick off with a segment I like to call One Truth and One Lie. So what I'm going to do, Melissa, is I'm going to present to you two seemingly crazy facts about the South African national football team. One is completely true, 100% true. The other is completely made up. Absolutely fake. I just want to see if you can decipher which is which. So I'll read them back to back and you let me know which you think is which. So fact number one, following the 2010 World Cup, South Africa passed the Vuvuzela Volume Act, which stated that if any fan caught blowing a vuvuzela at a frequency higher than 130 decibels could be issued an on-the-spot fine. Fact number two, ahead of the 1998 World Cup, the Tunisian national team officially complained to FIFA about Nelson Mandela, arguing that his presence in the VIP box at South Africa games constituted unfair psychological interference. So which do you think is true? Did South Africa pass a Vuvuzela Volume Act, or did the Tunisian national team officially complain about Nelson Mandela?
You know what? These are both so equally ridiculous. And so many ridiculous things happen in South African football and African football that I worked the 2010 World Cup, and I'm now actively trying to remember if such an act was passed, because I definitely would have commented on it at the time. But it's hard to keep up with all the crazy stuff in African football, so I'm going to go with Tunisia complaining, actually.
Your instincts are bang on. That is absolutely what happened. So the background being, they wanted Mandela moved further away from the pitch after he appeared to kind of inspire South Africa to Africa Cup of Nations glory in 1996 against, you guessed it, Tunisia in the final, because he turned up and wearing a Bafana Bafana shirt, and I guess gave them some, big inspiration.
I don't blame them fearing Nelson Mandela's aura. Who wouldn't?
Exactly. But as for this summer, so South Africa are in Group A alongside hosts Mexico, as well as South Korea, and at the time of recording, a yet to qualify European team, which could end up being Ireland, depending on how the playoffs go. Should South Africa top that group, they'll face one of the best ranked third place teams, in the round of 32. Not a lot of group winners, or not all of the group winners, I should say, face a best ranked third team. So that's a pretty good opportunity for South Africa. If they finish runners up in the group, they'll face the runners up of Group B, which again, at the time of recording, could end up being Wales, Northern Ireland, or four-time champions Italy. But before we get into the nitty gritty about the summer tournament this itself, I just want to begin with a section we call the travel log. So before we talk players and tactics and what we can expect from South Africa, I just want to find out a little bit more about the country and the culture and the fans and the history and that sort of stuff. So kick us off with a big question, Melissa. Who is South Africa's footballing GOAT?
It's Ace and Shalengu. That's who my grandfather would say if he was still alive. However, unfortunately, we never got to see the late Ace play because of apartheid South Africa, the boycott on them. He was a Kaiser Chiefs midfield maestro, and he also played in the North American Soccer League at the time when Pele, George Best, Johan Cruyff, they were all in the league. And David Fairclough, the Liverpool legend, he was actually playing as well at the time. And he would say that Ace was up there with all of them, that he actually could do things with the ball that none of the others could do. And he'd never actually seen anybody juggle a football before. Obviously, nowadays, it's such a common thing. But back then, it wasn't done. And what would happen is the coach would get Ace to come out and he'd say, "Okay, Ace, show us a skill today or do something for us." And Ace would do it, and none of the other players would be able to replicate it. He would basically give them a tutorial as well on how to do it, like step by step, and they couldn't. But he was one of those players that could bend games to their will. When you listen, like even South Africa's other great players, and there's so many, Jomo Sonu, Dr. Kamalo, they will all say it's
Mm.
Ace. And there's some footage, thankfully, that's online that you can go and look at to give you a flavor of how brilliant he was in dictating tempo. So people say he was a mix of like, think of Xavi's passing, Xavi a pass master, but then he also had the ability of like a Steven Gerrard to just bang in a ridiculous volley out of nowhere to decide a game. But if I'm talking about who I've actually seen play and who the last few generations would probably consider, you've got Dr. Kamalo, you've got Lucas Radebe, who people in England will be quite familiar with, but then you've got Benni McCarthy. And I think in terms of achievements, Benni McCarthy is South Africa's top goal scorer. Um, he aced it in Europe with Ajax, with Porto. He did well at Celta Vigo. He obviously won the Champions League, which is the pinnacle of club football. And so I would say it's Benni McCarthy. His longevity as well in the national team.
Mm.
And the fact that he's managed to evolve and become a very good, respected coach.
Mm.
Won titles in South Africa, obviously went to Europe, worked with Manchester United under Eric Ten Hag. So I think if all things considered, it would be Benni McCarthy.
What is South Africa's most celebrated football result? We mentioned AFCON wins at the top.
It's definitely 1996
Yeah.
AFCON final because of everything South African football had been through. Like I said, the boycott during apartheid South Africa meant that, like I said, we never got to see amazing players like Ace
Mm.
on stages they deserved to play on. But the national team also never had a chance to formulate properly, play together, have a chemistry, build up a rapport, build up, things that you usually look for when you judge a team. What's their form like? What's their identity? What makes them stand out? What makes them great? South Africa didn't have this sort of rich history in international football going into that tournament because of the boycott on apartheid South
Mm.
Africa. So to win the 1996 AFCON World Cup after South Africa, the Springboks had won the 1995 Rugby World Cup was absolutely huge, huge, huge for the country. And it still resonates in a big way today.
Yeah, obviously, those you mentioned there, the 1995 Rugby World Cup win, the 1996 AFCON win, both coming at a time when South Africa was coming out of apartheid. Obviously Nelson Mandela was there, very influential in both situations. Um, Over in recent years, there has been a little bit of political strife in South Africa. Do you think that a strong World Cup tournament this summer would go some way to kind of bringing everybody together? Perhaps not in exactly the same way, but you could have mentioned there South Africa is super successful at rugby, but ultimately, I don't want to put words in your mouth, nothing will compare in that country to a big footballing kind of success. Is that fair to say?
Absolutely. South Africa is known for being dominant on the rugby front, understandably so. However, it's football that's South Africa's national sport. That is what gets people going. That is what resonates through the townships. And regardless of what background you come from in South Africa, what your social status is, or your class or your race, you love football. It's in your blood in the country. So in the 2010 World Cup, the feeling around the place, like the buzz in the country, was absolutely ridiculous. You had people that couldn't afford TVs, but you'd have like one person in the community who did have a TV, and they'd, put it outside and create this setup where people were bringing plugs and chairs and everybody could congregate together and watch it. It's such a communal part of culture in South Africa. And if Bafana did well at this World Cup, during the entirety of the tournament, what you're going through, it provides an escape from it. If you've got, economic problems, as is the case in South Africa, there's so much unemployment, there's still so much discrepancies and disparity stemming from colonization and then apartheid that affects the majority of the people that live in the country. But football and the World Cup provides a lovely escape. The African Nations Cup that happened recently as well. That's a lovely little thing to go and invest yourself in, and feel like you're a part of and enjoy in a community aspect. And if South Africa get out of their World Cup group, honestly, that would make people back home so happy.
Sal, you mentioned the sort of what it means to fans. South Africa has a quite a considerable, almost powerful contingency of female fans, often nicknamed the mamas. Can you describe the role that women play in sort of South African football fandom?
Mama Joy is probably front and center of that. She is utterly amazing. She follows the national team home and away. She's always at the African Nations Cups. South African football is hugely colorful and vibrant and pays tribute to the different cultures and the sort of melting pot that we do have in the country. And women often symbolize that because they are the creators of a lot of the, obviously, the clothing that reflects the different cultures, the headdresses, all of those things. But in South Africa, football is as big for females as it is for males, and it was always the case. And though there were sporting sanctions on South Africa during apartheid, people would still lose themselves in football. Like in the townships, you'd go and watch just local people, kicking around in the sand, on the streets. And mothers would always be part of that. Your grandmother, people would always be watching, or even if you were having a kickabout, in I don't want to say in the garden because we didn't really have gardens, it was just a street. You know, your mother, your grandmother, your aunties, they're all watching. It's not just about football in South Africa. In the entire fabric of South Africa, even throughout the apartheid struggle, you had a lot of key women who were instrumental in change, in trying to push forward for freedom. And I think that's just a tenet of South African women in general. I can think of Winnie Mandela. There's so many names of people, of females who were instructive during the struggle, because South African culture and South Africa as a country in general, women are very, very much at the heart and core of it.
Right, we'll just move on to the scouting report. So, this is where we'll find out a little bit more about the players, the general setup of the squad, the manager, what we can generally expect from South Africa. So, just remind us, Melissa, for the British fans tuning in, who are we going to recognise in the squad? Are there any players that currently play in the UK or formerly of the UK? What can you tell us?
Yeah, the standout name obviously will be Lyle Foster, who plays for Burnley. Had a very, very good start to the Premier League season, was in great scoring form. I actually think Burnley's style of play doesn't really suit him because Scott Parker's very defense minded in terms of the way he sets his team up. They hardly go very direct or put you under pressure, whereas he can run the channels really well, back to goal, brilliant. If you play in between the lines to him, I don't think defenders want to get into a position where a ball's played over the top and he can, race them and try and take them on and take the ball on, because he's very, very strong in that regard. So Lyle Foster will definitely be someone they know. Percy Tau didn't get called up for the African Cup of Nations squad. Brighton fans will be familiar with him. But the South African team is made up of home based players, which is, again, a change under Hugo Broos. He doesn't care what your name is, where you're playing. If you show a consistency in performance, he will tend to pick you. And I think, apart from Lyle, you don't have a starter that plays European football.
Touched on Bruce there, so obviously the South African manager. For those not aware, how will he set South Africa up, generally speaking, and are fans quite positive about him, given what his tenure's been like at the moment?
So Hugo Broos came in and completely changed the culture and mentality of South African football. It was very ego driven and based, the headline names. It feels a little bit like England when you think of, past England teams and the makeup of the squad, and how, even if it didn't make tactical sense, all these big names were just squashed into the starting lineup to appease them and to appease people. And he came in and he got rid of a lot of the big name players that he felt were not only older but were stale. They weren't really offering anything. They were playing more for themselves than they were for the national team. And he made it very, very clear that if you were good enough and if you were consistent enough, he will give you a chance. And he also, when he came in, he said, I want to completely undo this mentality that just because you're playing for the national team, that's good enough. Like, that you've made it. You haven't made anything. South Africa, do you know your heritage? Do you know about the AFCON in 96? Do you know about the great players that have represented this team? Do you know about Ace? Do you know about Dr. Kumalo? Do you know about Joe Mosono? Do you know that these guys went to America and they were playing with your George Bests and your Pelés? And those guys were saying, oh my goodness, like, look how good they are, look how talented they are. Why don't you want to reach that kind of level again? Why don't you want to be successful? Why can't you? And that mentality switch and the attitude switch and the discipline, because I think that was a huge thing as well. the discipline around a tactical framework, but also if you're 30 seconds late for a team meeting, there will be trouble. All these small little things that he's put into place have made the team a lot more serious about being successful, and I think that's a great thing. South Africa's performances under him have been very, very good, especially at the African Nations Cup. Very disappointing this time around in Morocco that they didn't get to the final because they were one of the favorites. And the team themselves felt that they could get to the final, that they could win it. They came short against Cameroon, but in the opening 15, 20 minutes of that game, they played unbelievable football without actually making their dominance count on the scoreboard. And that was their downfall. He is popular and he's well liked, but during that tournament, he made some comments, and I think people felt he was deflecting too much or he was trying to make excuses. So this World Cup is really important, I think, in terms of the legacy he's going to leave behind as South Africa coach. Because he did say after this tournament he's going to walk away, he thinks he's going to retire. But how people will judge the entirety, I think, of his spell in charge will come down to this. And I think that's a little bit unfair because it is a tricky group. People will look at it, and South Africans are like this as well. They'll look at it and think, well, there's no giant name like
Mm,
Spain or
mm.
Brazil or Argentina, and they'll think, well, why can't we win? But it is an incredibly difficult group in terms of the circumstances of where each country is, right, in their footballing journey.
Just looking at the group, you sort of touched upon it there, but Mexico, South Korea, and then either Ireland, Czech Republic, Denmark, or North Macedonia. How do you think South Africa are going to get on, and what would represent like a good tournament and a bad tournament? And you mentioned earlier about just getting out the group would give everybody a lift. Is it as simple as that? Is getting out the group would that be enough to represent a good tournament?
I think that has to just be your starting base. You've got to think we back ourselves to get out of the group. Now, I know a lot of those players and they are so cohesive, they're quite a strong unit, and their ambitions will be bigger than that. But I think as a first step, the country would be proud if South Africa got out of the group, which isn't something they were able to do in 2010 and became the first host nation to not make it out of the group, which wasn't a record that we wanted to have. But yeah, I think that would represent a good step because, as well, like I said, people might look at the group and think there's no major nation in it. Mexico, they were disappointing in their few friendlies after the Gold Cup, but they're on a great run. They're defensively so solid.
Mm,
They've got a lot of variations in attack that they can count on. Um, Huge football culture, so steeped in it. South Korea, they're tricky as well.
mm.
Son, what's their FIFA ranking now? I think it's something like
Higher
13.
than, yeah,
Yeah,
higher than
yeah,
people remember, yeah, or would think,
yeah,
yeah. Mm,
yeah. Exactly. People will just see South Korea and think, easy,
mm,
but not actually because they're super, super consistent. Um, and then you don't know what's going to happen in the other team. And I think what South Africa need to do is really enhance their own strengths. They're a solid team in transition. They're really, really good at immediately defense into attack, two good balls, very, very slick football, quick passing into play. A lot of the players come from Mamelodi Sundowns, and we say shoeshine and piano football. So piano's like, quick passing, like if you think of the keyboard, and shoeshine is that like quick transition. If you think of,
oh yeah, I like that. That's a great
the
phrase.
movement of shining your shoes, and it's like going one end to the other. So it's flair, but flair with a real solidity behind it. You asked what would be disappointing. I think if they didn't make it out of the group, but they also didn't really play very well or didn't win a game. Because I think because it's a tricky group, you cannot make it out of the group, but give a very, very good account of yourselves, and that wouldn't be that bad. But if the performances were disappointing, then yeah, that would be a stinker of a tournament.
Who is South Africa's talisman? And is there anyone in the squad that big clubs from Europe are going to have their eye on this summer?
Well, Talisman, I would say that there's no one player the team particularly relies on in terms of their goal scoring, or there's a few. Timbers Wane missed the African Nations Cup because of injury, but he's back into the fold now. He'll get to play some friendlies before the World Cup, so that's pretty positive. We've got Mokoena, who's amazing in midfield. You've got Apollos up front, who's very, very creative, dynamic, makes things happen. Foster, who, if you give him the right kind of service, is quite deadly. The player that European scouts should be looking at is the defender Mbukazi, who has moved to the US. He's playing for Chicago Fire. And even Hugo Broos is like, what are you doing? Why have you made that move? You're better than this. You could be playing for a big European club, Premier League club. The issue I'll come back to is visa restrictions, which make it very, very difficult for a lot of scouts, and a lot of teams don't even feel it's worth it often enough to go and do scouting in regions where they know that in order to get a permit, it's going to be so taxing. And it's made easier if the players maybe gone and spent 5 years in Belgium or 5 years in Portugal, because then you can prove, well, he was that exceptional that he spent all that time in a top league, and now can get the visa to come over to the UK. But I do know that Mbakazi was being watched by a lot of European scouts, which is why his coach was so frustrated that he then decided to go straight to the MLS at 20. And he is very, very good. He's quite short, which people will say, well, we don't understand what he's doing in defense. But then Sandro Martinez,
I was going to say that exact name, yeah.
and it was Lyle Foster is quite big, and is, like I said, he's got such an all-rounded game as a forward. And he was telling me, oh, I hate, like, in training when I come up against him and stuff. He's reading off the game, and his strength and speed is so good, especially in terms of anticipating what's going to happen and then using his body to get the better of you. So yeah, that's where they should be looking.
Interesting. Well, one to watch for sure. You get to turn one England player South African for the World Cup. Who are you picking and why?
Oh, this is a difficult one, because I was trying to think of what do England have that South Africa don't, rather than who's my favorite England player that I wish was South African and playing for South Africa. I think I would have to say probably Harry Kane, just for the guarantee of goals and that having a reference point. South Africa is so collective as a team. Like I said, you don't have one person that you're thinking, we need him to hit all our goals in qualifying or in the tournament itself, or there's going to be nothing. And collectivity can be a strength, but if you have somebody that you're guaranteeing that ball's going in the area, they're going to make it count. I think that would be quite decisive. Um, so yeah, I'd say Harry Kane.
Well, we'll just wrap up with a few little quick fire questions about the World Cup. So you just let me know whatever the first thing that comes to your mind. So first and foremost, I'm going to put you on the spot. Who is winning the World Cup?
Oh, I am going to go with, I want to say Spain, but I'm going to say France.
Okay. Where does South Africa finish? How do they get on?
South Africa get out of their group.
And how far do they go? Last 32 or any further?
Last 32.
Last 32. Okay, that would be.
I want to be more optimistic, but
Hey, that would be a record for South African football. So that's a positive, optimistic, optimistic one. Who's winning the Golden Ball? So that's the player of the tournament.
Player of the tournament is going to be. We have to think in terms of goals and performances that catch the eye, because somebody like Pedri, for example, I don't think would, despite being an incredible player, would
Hmm.
be in the running for something like that. How far do we think Argentina are getting? Shall we just be boring and say Leo Messi?
Hey, well, it's a worthy a worthy pick, I'd say. He's can do it. He's done it twice. I'm sure he can do it a third time.
Yeah.
What about the Golden Boot?
Kylian Mbappe.
Mbappe. Barbecue or braai?
Right.
Of course. Beef jerky or biltong?
Biltong, that is not even like, they shouldn't even be spoken about in the same category. It's embarrassing to Biltong.
Soccer City or the Estadio Azteca?
Or the Azteca. Sorry, Soccer City.
And lastly, Vuvuzelas, annoying or iconic?
Do you think I want to go back to South Africa and be hit with the Vuvuzela? I'm going to go iconic.
And lastly, to complete the episode, what is your controversial / outrageous prediction for the World Cup? Doesn't have to be about South Africa necessarily.
Yeah, I was thinking about the outrageous things that could happen. And there's so many outrageous things happening in the build up to this tournament itself, with the US and Donald Trump and everything that's going on, that I was struggling to think of a football thing that could be as shocking. However, I think what might surprise people, and I'm really hoping this happens, especially given in the context of the African nations drama they've been roped into. Senegal are in a tough group because they've got France.
Hmm.
However, I think their mentality, be- especially driven by this whole debacle and how consistent they've been in African tournaments over the last few years as well, I think Senegal are going to do really, really well in this World Cup. Please, Senegal, come on, don't let me down. You can do it, boys.
That would be a heck of a story of revenge, wouldn't it? After
Yeah.
what's happened, that would be so cool. Well, I'm keeping my fingers crossed for that as well. To be fair, fantastic. Thank you so much, Melissa. Really do appreciate your time. And that's it for our South Africa preview. Let us know in the comments how you think South Africa will get on at the World Cup this summer. And join us next time for more insights, stories, and deep dives as our global scouting mission continues as we count down the days to the FIFA World Cup this summer. Until then, keep making football great again.